Hello, my name's Karen Wills. I'm Senior Vice President of Marketing and Investor Relations here at Strategicon. Welcome, everybody, to our webinar on benchmarking brilliance. And as you can see, I have a great panel here with me. We'll try to keep them in control, but no promises. So I hope you're ready to get your questions answered. We had many of them coming in, and we're going to be moving fast. So we'll also be fielding questions from you during the webinar. So if you have a question, there's a question tab on your panel, and please enter it into that, and I will be throwing these questions at the panel during the course of the webinar. I also wanted to say, stay tuned for upcoming events. We have more events that are going to be coming up in July and August, as well as some conferences this fall where we will be showcasing the Clinical Maestro solution. So, stay tuned, keep an eye on our website. Those will all be posted there, and we'll be certainly letting you know. And also, relative to this topic that we're talking about in terms of benchmarking brilliance, don't forget to check out the handouts that we have in there. We have some that are very applicable. One is Cost Benchmarking is a Necessity, is a blog that was written by our CEO, Anka. Paradigm of the Fixed Cost Model, again, one that seems to be very popular with people. And there's also a white paper on untying the knot of bid grid mapping, which, as we all know, is a challenge in the pharma outsourcing world. And if you're looking for more resources, just check out the resources tab on the Strategicon webpage. So let me now introduce our team that we have here, our illustrious team. Our moderator for today is going to be Rennie Stevens. So Rennie is the director of Danforth Advisors, and which is a global advisory organization that's been a trusted partner to more than 1,000 life science organizations. He's a highly experienced subject matter expert in the clinical outsourcing space, having worked across the entire spectrum of the industry in leading organizations such as Pfizer, Astellas, Covance, and PharmaNet, just to name a few. So thank you, Rennie, for joining us, and appreciate you agreeing to be our moderator and trying to keep this crew in line. And then I'd also like to introduce two senior leaders from Strategicon and my colleagues. So first, we have our CEO, Anka Kopescu, who's our CEO and founder, whom you may have met in multiple webinars or at conferences. She gets around. This is why we post where's Waldo LinkedIn post, trying to find her. She does, however, have more than 20 years of experience in working with both CROs and pharma companies, and she's obviously very passionate about driving innovation and technology in clinical business operations, and created Clinical Maestro as the flagship benchmarking solution in the industry. And joining her will be my colleague, Holly Leslie, Strategicon's Vice President. Thank you, Holly, about customer success. Again, with more than 20 years of life science experience, Holly brings a multidisciplinary approach to the clinical success operations. She's worked collaboratively, easy for me to say, collaboratively with sponsors, CROs, vendors, sites, and patients. And prior to joining Strategicon, she was Director of Commercial Strategy at Medidata. So, okay, so I've given you guys a little bit of background, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to kick this off with a poll before I toss it over to Rennie. So I'm going to launch the poll here. The poll will just give us an idea of kind of where to start with the questions and get a perspective on what you're looking for. So let me launch the poll here. So the poll question is, what are your biggest challenges currently? Is it conducting CRO bid budget due diligence by comparing different CROs during the bidding? So that would be competitive bidding. Conducting CRO budget due diligence, which is comparing preferred CRO agreements, so non-competitive bidding. So you want to check out their due diligence relative to the actual bid. Conducting due diligence on change orders, something we all love, or estimating accurately the cost of an upcoming trial. So if you can put in your votes, I'm watching, I can see how many people have voted, then we'll close this and we'll show the results, and then we'll toss it over to our panel, and you don't have to listen to me go on and on. So, so let's see. So keep going. I know we've got about half of you have voted. We'll get some more of you up there. Get everybody to vote. All right. Well, this is we'll give you about another 5 seconds here. So go for it if you can. If you want to vote. You're in, you're out. All right, I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to share the results. And Rennie, now I'm going to toss it over to you to review the results with our panelists and let our audience know what you guys think of this.
Well, thanks. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Good deal. Thank you. Well, listen, I think the results of the poll are interesting enough and speaks to why we're even here today, really, to talk about benchmarking. So, estimating the cost of an upcoming trial. Well, why don't we just start with the basics? And Holly, tell us what benchmarking is and why it's important. And I'm assuming most everybody actually is familiar with what it is and why it's important, but maybe not to some degree. So let's give a stab at that one.
Sure, thank you. So hello, everyone. Benchmarking in its simplest terms is the process of measuring and evaluating data against an alternative data set. So you can talk about a competitor, an industry average, or a best-in-class example. It can be done internally by comparing your own data over time, or more commonly externally by using outside sources. And it's really no different here, what we're talking about here today. So when we refer to financial benchmarks, you'll commonly hear the abbreviation FMV, fair market value. These terms are interchangeable. FMV is the average price agreed upon between the buyer, the trial sponsor, and the seller, the CRO or the vendor, for goods and services used during a clinical trial. So that's what it is. Now, why is it important? And that's a really important part of this. So benchmarking can help you identify gaps, opportunities, and strengths in your contract. And it can provide you with data and evidence to support your negotiation strategy. It enables predictability in the trial financial forecast. And in the US, it allows sponsors to avoid federal anti-kickback statutes. And of course, there's similar ethics legislation globally as well. And all of that is aimed at ensuring that there's no undue influence over outcomes and all parties are involved are compensated fairly. That's about how I'd sum it up.
So,
yeah,
excellent. Holly, sorry,
Tim,
go
you
ahead.
want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to comment back to the poll that was quickly on the screen. And I was thinking must be somewhere that people are not preoccupied by change orders because usually they are a major pain point. But it's also the beginning of the budget season. I think that's why people are thinking about benchmarking or having benchmark data to think about upcoming studies. But that poll actually was meant to capture what in my mind are the 4 different nuances of benchmarking. It's either you are looking competitively to see how different service providers stack against each other. And sometimes the variance is so large, and we've seen it over and over again in sourcing, that you need another point. You're not gonna work to the lowest CRO, nor to the highest, nor take the average, because maybe, the answer, it's anywhere around the scale. And internal benchmarking, very important. And that was, I believe, 20% of the people were thinking about preferred CRO agreements. And we know that's one thing to negotiate rates and fixed costs and put them in a beautiful agreement, put a ribbon on them, have a great wine, champagne after that to celebrate it, but actually knowing if those rates were used and if the agreement actually is reflected in every single bit, it's challenging. And driving a historical analytics from your historical bit is very, very challenging. So these are different nuances of benchmarking, and that's why I think it's so important. And I know, Rainey, you've looked at benchmarks from all points of view, right? As a consultant, as a CR on the CRO side, the sponsor side. Why is it important?
Well, I think you guys hit on a couple of key points in this that I think everyone should, for me, they were pretty good points of interest. FMV, because, a lot of times we might think of fair market value mostly in the investigator cost arena, but, it's actually equally important in your vendor, costing and your sourcing. So using benchmarking to establish what you would expect to pay, and then comparing the data that comes in from a proposal request that goes out to the vendor pool against that benchmarking is it's a step in due diligence. It's not just a checkbox, but it also helps you with where I think people were going in the responses to the question, which is, estimating what a trial might, actually cost, right? So it's not just downstream when you're in the middle of your sourcing event and you're trying to choose the right provider and validate to your internal compliance group or legal or even eventually external, parties that you progress down a methodical and logical pathway using data to help you decide where you actually landed. But it's upstream too, right? So when you're doing your you're doing your LRP, right? And I think if we're getting into budget season now, it's not just about next season, or next year's budget, but you're trying to potentially look 18, 24, even 5 years down the road and allocate funding now from a high level budget perspective to your upcoming programs. So, that was one, the FMV thing. And I think the other thing that you guys mentioned was really about that standardization and how you're comparing. I think, Anki, you were talking about when it comes in and how you look at that. And I wanted to go there with respect to the questions, that we've got on the table from some of the clients and potential sponsors out there, but around, validating those costs and then looking at those costs in a standardized format. Can you guys comment on that a bit? Because I think it's really important, outside of getting to the numbers that you're looking for from a portfolio projection perspective, right? You're also trying to reduce the time it's taking you to get there, right? So I think let's go there next.
I'll jump quickly and I'll pass it on to Holly. Standardization is key to interpreting data. I mean, how many times we talk about comparing apples with oranges? Yes, you can, they're both fruits. But understanding the nuances of costs also goes back to, it primarily goes back to pricing the same thing or evaluating the cost for the same activity. And that's where I hope we get some readership on our BitGrid mapping white paper, which is attached. There is no standardization in nomenclature, and for many, many reasons in pharma industry. And for many, many reasons, there was no incentive to do so. The CROs had no incentive to align their costing models, but then they are in the game of constantly mapping, which is a very expensive and error-prone exercise. Because the sponsors also had no incentive to map their grids on their end, which created this constant game of each sponsor having its own standard, which is different from sponsor to sponsor, each CRO having its own structure in their costing tool. And I gave a presentation at the PCMG forum about a month ago. There are over $5 million possible combination. That means 5 million possibilities of introducing error in pricing. So standardization and the industry coming to a common nomenclature for benchmarking has huge benefits. And we are trying to do that within Clinical Maestro by coming in the middle between the CRO vocabulary, and we all know large CROs, because they also merge with each other, they bought each other. And so they didn't do a good job either at getting their own costing tools meshed together. There are 10,000 or more lines that you can find in a top CRO costing tool. And the typical pharma would have less than 100. So even if you take the 10,000 on this side to the 100 on the sponsor, means you are mapping, and then you are mapping differently for each sponsor. Clinical Maestro is about 700 lines. It's still not the 10,000. It's not the 100 or less. And we have developed mapping technology to actually connect the dots in a more efficient way than it has been done in the past. But this is a bit of a long answer, and I asked my team to discipline me from providing long answers. What I'm trying to say, it is extremely important for efficiency and for accuracy to be comparing apples to apples. Going back to the
Okay, so
common sense answer.
I'm going to jump in here with a question from the customer. I'm going to toss it back to Holly and get us back to benchmarking. So yes, understanding that comparing apples to apples, but looking at Strategicon's benchmarking capabilities, the question comes in as to what is the broad base of studies for the benchmarks? What's our benchmarking database look like? So
Great question. That's a great question. It's an important question too, because I think when you're looking at different tools out there, it's important to know that it's going to have depth in the data, because, as Anka was just hitting on, no two sponsors look at things the same way. And, it's important to make sure you've got enough depth there. In our case, we've got more than 500 anonymized studies across multiple therapeutic areas and more than $5 billion in cost points. And that's a huge, huge piece of the equation right there. And the one thing I want to just tie back real quick to one other thing that Anka was just talking about, because the other thing you have to factor in here is every single organization right now is going through significant churn. And what I mean by that, it could be layoffs, it could be just hiring freezes, it could be, so everyone, both CRO, vendor side and sponsor side, are being tasked to do more with less. And standardization is going to gain you that efficiency that people are wasting so much time in the day-to-day trying to manage this process. And if people would standardize and just bring it a little bit more into reality, I think you'd find your teams are going to have a lot more efficiency. But that database, more than 500 anonymized studies and across multiple therapeutic areas and more than 5 billion.
So let's pick up on that topic of the mapping and looking at it from, I don't know how many, providers are online today, but, I know that that's been it's a challenge point, right? When you're trying to introduce a new technology that streamlines things like Maestro does, and I'm not saying it's new because you guys have been around for a while now, but there is still some challenge in getting the CROs and the other vendors to understand that this also is good for them. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because, I don't know, I have my own opinions, but I'm just the moderator. So why don't you guys take it away?
Well, I'll ask for your opinion, but I'll get us started. We're talking about the depth of data, but I also want to say that technology and data is not wine, which means it doesn't age well. What is important is that data is current and it's flowing in a way that is capturing the latest trends. And not every entity that's looking at benchmark can claim the ability to do so. And that's particularly applicable for CROs because they are sitting on millions of bids, some of the large ones, thousands, even at the small CRO is going to do more than 200 to 300 bids a year easily. That's a very tiny one. So they have their historical data and they still theoretically should know at which price point they win and at which price point they lose. Again, the structure of the data being Excel spreadsheets with many, many tabs, unstandardized, standardized for them internally, but unstandardized to a central data collection makes it very challenging for the own CRO to evaluate what is the price point that leads to winning. And I've seen the data that I've seen last about 60% of the bids where a CRO loses are due to price. And it's nothing worse, and I know we have some CROs in the meeting and we've worked at CROs. It's nothing worse than working so hard on a proposal on the 2 weeks tight timeline and spend most of the time not on the quality of the proposal, but beating down the price. So I think the CROs should absolutely welcome benchmarking. We've done several exercises for large CROs and they do it as a spot check. Say, if the bid is more than 50 million, I better do a benchmark. Why? Do it all the time. Because if you take the pricing out of the negotiation, then you focus on what really matters. Your unique expertise, your pool of resources, the quality of your startup team, or whatever you may have that is a true differentiator. And it's not the price. And finally, I will make an analogy that I think the CRO should understand that, and it is trying to buy a car. When I want to buy a car, and before cars.com and before other websites, you would just go dealership to dealership, right? Remember, and ask, how much you give me, what kind of car do you have with these type of specs? And you will get a price, and you'll go to the other dealer, they'll cut you another deal and propose you a different car. And then, well, just the process of buying takes so long. So now actually we can define very accurately the specs of the car, and it should be no mystery. I shouldn't have to go with the specs from dealership to dealership. I should know already how much it costs and go to the dealership that whatever is most convenient for me for whatever reason. So I think CROs should embrace benchmarking. They need it. It's nothing worse than wasting time negotiating price. And
actually,
it should be common. It's like sites don't have access to Grants Plan and Grants Manager. Why? Well, until another better solution may be coming, but it's no reason why. Why keep pricing secret? I don't get it.
And I'm going to jump in here because you just opened the gate to what I think is the spicy part of this question. And the reason why I think it's spicy is because I have quite a few site friends, and let's face it, the CROs have made sites live with benchmarks and FMV for decades. So the reluctance here is a little ironic. And again, the same reason the CROs are using benchmarks with sites is the same reason sponsors should use them with the CROs. So I would actually caution CROs from losing sight of the forest for the trees, because I think it's really important. We're all called to be good stewards of the money that is placed in our management. But I get why CROs may be reluctant to be stacked up against a benchmark, but in competitive bidding situations, it's happening whether you realize it or not. Yeah. The submitting CROs are already being benchmarked against each other without that neutral industry mark, which would be kind of what I call baseline reality. So when this happens, like Anka just said a few moments ago, the high and low bidders stand out like sore thumbs. Attention goes to the cluster in the middle. But what if you're the highest or lowest bidder for a bona fide reason? You may not even get to bid defense to even prove that out. So it's important. So for example, you might have tremendous experience in a particular patient population or a geographic area, and you've added hours and costs in to better support those sites and those patients, which you can prove historically has led to better retention and better outcomes. You used to bid like everybody else, but experience has taught you differently. And you have the ability, when these things are isolated and highlighted within a neutral benchmark, to be able to come to the table and explain to the sponsor why you're the safer choice, even though you might be higher or lower. And the reality is you don't know you've been underbid or overbid. So it opens the door to conversations, and it's going to enable them to explain their strategy much more effectively. And again, I think it's really going to improve everything over the long course.
Rainey, weigh in here.
Well, I think a couple of things. One, Anka, you mentioned it, and I think it's important. And I've used Maestro in the past, and with some of my clients, and the key value in what we do from an outsourcing perspective is taking cost out of the equation. And you mentioned that, I think you both were alluding to it as well. And that's what I think, that's one of the things that I love about your system, Anka, is that, you're able to normalize costs. And if you use benchmarking to drive a pinpoint discussion, so you're not talking about the overall bid as much as you're really talking about isolated areas. Help us understand, you're X percentage over in this category, right? So that reduces the amount of time that it takes to analyze the bids that come in, because you're not translating everybody's special Excel bid grid into your own format, or you're not driving it out. Like if you've got your own bid grid from a sponsor perspective, you're forcing the CROs and the other vendors to bid into that grid. They're still going through the translation process, and it's all offline, and it's all still manual, and it's all still taking an enormous amount of time that you can't waste to get to a decision to move forward. So if you're using this system to apply benchmarking to help drive some consistency in the process, then you can get to the most important things quicker. And that's actually, I think, the most important part of the discussion today really is around helping the sponsors online and the CROs as well, we're trying to get through the noise so that you can really talk about the quality of your team and the quality of your experience and how you can execute against the protocol that's sitting in front of you most efficiently and effectively, instead of wasting time churning about the noise about costs,
Right.
or one versus another. So, and if we can go to the next question about that, where there was a question from one of the sponsors that said, how do you leverage Maestro to drive FTEs, right? And determine the load of resources that you need in the study. So if that's another piece of this that I think is pretty important. If we can talk about that just a little bit, that'd be great.
I'll get us started again. Look, the cost is the cost of services is a function of humans putting effort into performing activities. So if you think about a line item of anything, conduct a monitoring visit, let's say, it's going to have an average of 8 hours on site. If it's on site, it's going to have, let's say, an average of 4 hours travel. It's going to have 1 or 2 hours of follow-up and whatever 1 or 2 hours of report writing. However you name it, you can calculate it's about 10 hours. And you know exactly who's going to do it. It's going to be the CRA, and it's going to be verified by a more senior person conducting it. So resources are highly predictable. And if you know you have 1,000 or 1,000,000 of these activities, you can estimate how many FTEs you need. This is activity-based costing, which is our universal principles. So the way we price, and we believe the pricing would be, is based on resources allocated to activities, and you can flip the analysis to say, if I were to do the monitoring visits myself, how many people will I need? Then as a sponsor, you could do that analysis in aggregate, because if you have only one study and you only need 100 hours of a CRA, you might as well give it to the CRO, right? So, or you get someone on contract for a short period of time. If you are talking about, high volume in aggregate, you can basically put yourself in the CRO role. What I found you cannot do as a sponsor trying to use estimated FTE to estimate cost internal is the sponsor is not very good at knowing how much their own resources cost. I'm yet actually to see a sponsor that can say how much their own CRA cost, because finance will give them something, but with overhead, without overhead, with this, with that. So, but effort and hours you can estimate by putting yourself and saying, hey, I'm going to be the CRO. A sponsor typically is not going to be as efficient, though. The CRO is in the business of allocated resources to activities. So if you are doing this as a sponsor using a tool like Maestro that would estimate resources, put a little bit of markup on top, because sponsor business is not resource allocation. It should be, but it's not. Most of the time, don't want to be too general. Holly, what's your experience?
Yeah, no, I think you kind of nailed it. I think it's, the lack of transparency in internal organizations around how do you manage this, and in being able to get to the right data, being able to kind of peel away the onion, so to speak, to go, okay, why do you have so many people there? Make me understand that. That's not what we would have done internally. Being able to kind of leverage that experience and grow from that and kind of model accordingly. I think the ultimate piece here is that without the appropriate data, you can't get to the answers. And a lot of people just are flying blind. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. So thank you both for that stuff. Now that was more, we're talking higher level here in a lot of ways. Let's dig a little deeper. Can we just know, because we've got about 13 minutes left in the webinar today. So I think, if I'm right, but let's go to some more specific. So I'm a small biotech, right? I only have a one study, maybe two. Is it worth it to invest in a benchmarking tool and a RFP management tool, right? So that's kind of a trick question, but
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, look, if you are a biotech, like most of our, actually the early customers were 100% San Francisco biotechs, because that's where we were. So they were our friends and colleagues. That's how business gets started. But I would say if you are a biotech with one study, that one study is so precious to you. It is the key of future investment. It determines how quickly you will grow. It's going to, make it or break it, make or break you. And most of the time, the small biotechs, I'm not talking about one study, I'm talking even of the one, let's say, less than 5, are going to be understaffed.
Yeah.
And using a lot of consultants, which are not a permanent fixture. They may be here today, they may not be here tomorrow. So the knowledge is not institutionalized. And absolutely, for one study, you have to negotiate because your dollars need to go longer. You don't have the know-how and the outsourcing department power of a mid to large pharma, and you can't just rely on your head of clinical operations to do everything, because that's not what they're supposed to do. So I would say if you're a small biotech, you have to talk to a person like Rainey. You have to use consultants that have the deep domain expertise, not just solo individuals. And I have done consulting myself. I think many of us have done it. Yeah. It's good, but it's temporary. And you absolutely need to negotiate like big pharma, and you don't have the tools. So yeah. I'll put the question back. Can you even afford not to do that on your precious study?
That's a good question.
And go ahead, Rennie.
Well, I was going to say, because I think the rationale why it makes a lot of sense, right? But now let's go further into that, because now we're talking about limited resources. Even you said that, Anka. They're employing companies like mine. Like we provide outsourcing experts to help drive this process, right, and negotiate on our sponsors' behalf with the CROs and other providers, right? But if they're not using those types of resources, and it does fall to those internal limited, staff, who best does that? And if no one internally is best positioned to do that, do you guys do that? Do you offer that kind of support from a tactical perspective?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll jump in here and start this one, Anka. My team can work in a couple of different ways, and we can stand you up to let you take the product and run with it and do your implementation. And there's more involved in that, but I'll just keep it simple for the sake of time. Or we've actually got clients where we actually sit almost directly on their team, and we participate in those study meetings. We have email addresses right with the company. I think in order to be effective in this space, you have to slice and dice how you offer, because again, we talked about the smaller companies, you've got the larger companies, but even some of the larger companies at this point, they need the additional support as well. So for us, that's an important piece of it. So we make a really concerted effort that our team that comes in has direct experience working in this. Many of the folks on my team have actually built their own departments. We've got some rock stars over here, I have to admit. And, so I think it's really important to kind of be able to offer different flavors to meet a customer where they need. And I think, the one thing for a small biotech to think about, and even the larger ones, I don't want to, just exclude anyone, is you can start with, I'm a big fan of the phrase crawl, walk, run. You can start crawling, where we work right indirectly with your team. We can slowly over time get you more independent. You find your own resources. We help train them up, and then you're finally running on your own. Because that's ultimately, the push and pull of a company is to decide how much they want to outsource versus how much they want to bring in-house, and the reality of that comes down to control. You have a lot more control when it's internal, but it's not always a practical solution.
Yeah, so and small companies need to partner effectively. That's, I know that from our own experience and working in small entities, the future belongs to the companies that partner effectively and creatively. So especially in pharma, execution takes so many aspects. So partnering effectively and creatively is mission critical. Oftentimes we get asked the question, and maybe you're going to ask me that, how do I justify to my CEO that I need a benchmarking tool? I know that's one of the questions because I was reading the questions coming through. And the reality, it's so simple. How can you go ahead without one? Because typically, if you can save 10% or more on an RFP, and I don't know, the average could be 1 million, 10 million, 50 million, it pays multiple times over the cost of the investment. Plus, it brings the know-how to do it. So to me, the question, how can you proceed without it? It's like, would you, I would ask the question, would you buy a house without looking at comparables? Would you? It's just whatever the first buyer offers to you. No, you're gonna know whatever house is sold in your zip code with, every comparable that applies to you. So my opinion, can't afford as a small company not to consider this.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think, oh, sorry, I was just going to add a little bit on there. I think ROI gets cloudy sometimes when you start talking about, in use and value cases and whatnot, because let's face it, every provider out there will promise savings, but you don't always see where those savings come from in the grand scheme of things, at least at the onset. So I think kind of coming back to what we said earlier, when you're introducing benchmarks to the negotiation process, you can be confident that that budget you're putting forward will hold over time, all things being equal. It's resulting in less unintended spend, which becomes really critical for those organizations, for any organization, because you're either accountable to your shareholder or you're accountable to the patient population you serve, and you're actually accountable to both at the end of the day. So being able to really be fiscally responsible with those dollars that are allotted to you helps build that use case that you need, and that contributes toward ROI. And that takes some time over time to realize, but a more refined budget baseline goes a long way to reducing those negotiation costs and cycles, and time is money. So the faster your team gets that trial to the starting gate, it's always going to be worth money to the organization. And the other thing I would just add on here, and it kind of goes back a little bit to the last question as well, is that when you consider in the industry, the average study will come in at the conclusion will come in 20 to 25% over budget. You were talking about significant money. I mean, when you talk about if you'd had just one study in phase 1 through 4, we're talking more than $8 to $10 million that's going to overrun. 8 to 10 million. That will get your CFO and your senior leadership's attention very easily, because the cost of doing nothing is astronomical.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. And I was getting ready to go because Anka, you did anticipate my question, which was about ROI, and then Holly, you followed up on that, which was about time. And I know that looking at benchmarking in isolation doesn't really address time, but it's the combination of using that data and streamlining the inputs and the exports from the system and the process through the use of Maestro, and which is where we're going here today, that cuts that time. And I can say, from past experience that, went from, it's easy enough to get 6 to 8 weeks into this process, and you're still wrangling over, the selection, because you're distracted because you're focused on the costs and you can't get to the bottom of alignment on those, right? Or you've gotten the costs out of the way, and now you're in the other piece of the puzzle, which is about the capabilities and all the other details. If you can cut out the cost piece and expedite the selection based on the capabilities of the provider and get to those real discussions, that's real money. And working that back. So maybe we can talk about, what about those time and cost savings? I know I have an experience I can share, but what are you all seeing from the customers that you support about how quickly they're able to get to decision using the benchmarking and the portfolio and then the source modules within Maestro?
I think it varies by entity, but I'll say on the small companies, the impact is more visible because also they have fewer studies, fewer resources. The CFO is looking, and the case studies, by the way, are not just related to negotiating with the CRO. There are a whole other services that you can look at benchmarking. And not only related to sourcing and negotiation, sometimes has to do with R&D partnership with a different pharma company. Or it may be directly related to fundraising. So VC type discussions. So the visibility and the impact on the small company is great. These are also the companies that sometimes struggle understanding the need for it. But once they get to once they understand the value, the efficiency, the time they spend getting to the answers they are seeking, it's significantly reduced. Again, I look at data as being able to, it enables players to ask the right questions. Benchmark, it does not necessarily reflect what the cost should be, as Holly said it. There may be a reason it may be high or maybe low, but it helps you ask the right question, get to the question, the answer faster. Large companies, and we had some interesting discussions recently. Large companies have really reduced their outsourcing departments significantly. So they are resource starved or hungry, much more than were in the past. Most of them had their own in-house systems that are also not very well supported and not very easy to drive analytics from. So the power of data in large companies, it's becoming a major driver, and that's top of mind for the head of operations, for the head of sourcing, for the head of the R&D finance people. So they are looking at scalability. So I don't know how much about cutting time. It's the value prop for big pharma, but they're not going to hire back all the people that they let go. So I think it's literally looking at, can I scale with the people I have, and can I get the answers that I need in absence of system of people who can do it manually, which is a luxury big pharma doesn't have now.
So, no, there's no luxury there anymore.
Let's pull that back up, because I think that's maybe probably for another webinar, honestly, about how it applies to the big pharma environment as well. But, the fundraising effort and the benchmarking, that's where we started with the poll. People want to know about, how do I get some benchmarking? And I have seen a lot of that lately in our consulting practice, clients reaching out, wanting to know, okay, I need to put some, numbers together for my fundraising effort, right? So you're a small biotech out there, and that's what, and one of the things that we're talking about is what data sources are we going to use to provide that support, in addition to, our own experience. So the last piece of that, I think, Anka and Holly, if y'all can just follow up on that, just to say, how are you going to help with the fundraising and benchmarking? Let's just close it out with that if we can.
Well, it's a lot of scenario planning. When you are fundraising, which I have done myself all of the last 12 months almost, well, all of 2023 almost. Fundraising is a very time-consuming exercise, and it's about scenarios. Fundraising for biotechs is equally intense, and it's about what if. What if, whatever probabilities you may have, you are successful in this therapy or in that therapy, the number of countries, the number of sites, the number of patients, what if is particularly important, because fundraising in the biotech space has become very challenging, and the expectation is it's going to continue to be challenging. So not only that, the inflation made the dollar stretch for shorter term, and the valuations are down significantly. Actually, last year, I believe it was the last 20 years lowest point. From a valuation perspective, risk tolerance is also significantly lower. So as a biotech fundraising, you need to run what if. I'm not even talking about using benchmarking for sourcing. I'm talking about understanding the worst case and the best case scenario. And what is equally important is not only using a benchmarking tool, but knowing what inputs to put and how to define the worst case and best case. And that's where I think expertise is needed beyond just data. Data needs to be interpreted. You need to know what to put in the inputs. and even how to present those worst case, best case scenarios to your investors. Very, very important.
I don't think I can add anything to that. She nailed it.
Well,
The only
but
other thing
Rennie, what do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Rennie's opinion on it.
So absolutely, I think the using a data source like Maestro to help with that portfolio projection, whether it's one study for the coming year, or whether it's a basket of studies, or for a long range plan, it's definitely a tool that's needed. And I think we've struggled in the industry for a long time with having a reliable and accessible tool. And I know there's been a couple out there that have tried to make inroads, and I think mostly big pharma has fallen back on their own internal data. That leaves the small biotechs out in the cold, essentially, because they don't have that data, right? So I think maybe you guys can talk about your relative position with competitors, right? Because are there other viable choices out there anymore? I have my own opinion about that because I've evaluated them over the last few years for a few clients, but I let's just be honest about that, about what's out there that you could use for benchmarking outside of Maestro. And
well, when we started, ClearTrial was around for 13, 14 years. And I was a user of that solution, and many of our people in our team have used that solution. It is a very good solution. And I look at the competition as being a health check. So it's important to have a healthy market. It's important to have more than one CRO, right? It's important to have more than one consulting company, more than one car dealership. So the differentiating factors have to do, in my mind, first and foremost with focus. We live and breathe in Clinical Maestro and in Strategicon around clinical business operation. We don't have any other business. And we know that the companies that are really focused on that, they have a lot to catch up. Hey, we didn't start with a weak competitor. We're starting with a strong competitor. So that means it takes a lot of effort, creativity, and there is always, functionality gap that you have to close over time. But we started with a single-minded focus. And look at what happened with other companies. You take Veeva around eTMF, being initially a single-line company. That's all they knew. It was eTMF. They took it to the next level, and then expanded around it to seal the market. You look at who remembers Face Forward CTMS. Now Oracle bought that one. Where is that today? I don't know, because there are so many other. You guys remember GoBalto before it was acquired? Such a successful company. Where is it? I don't know. It's acquisitions tend to get good ideas within a conglomerate of other good ideas where they are competing for resources. And I think that there will be more competition. I welcome competition. I would say that we are jumping. We've jumped at the opportunity, and we believe in what we are doing, and we're running very fast. And I will end with a simple example. We have a release every 3 months. ClearTrial released after 3 years last month, from April 2021 to May 2024. That's a big gap in release. So I don't know of any other tool. Actually, I did hear about another solution coming up in Europe. I have not seen it. I cannot speak to it. It's using AI, which we are also using to look at clinical costs. And look, competition is good. It's healthy. But I believe what differentiates us, it's focus. And we are closing the gap. We started with a big gap. Gap is getting narrower and narrower. We are getting better and better at what we do. And I hope we can keep it up. But obviously, we don't have the resources of other large companies. What we have is our drive and focus. So
And I think the other thing
hopefully that's a winning proposition.
And
So
it is.
Holly, I just want to jump in here. We have about 8 minutes to go, so I'll let you guys run up. And I just wanted to mention to the audience, if you guys have any questions that you'd like to get answered during this, please put them in the question thing, in the question box, and I'll get them to the team. So looking forward to that. Sorry, go back to you,
No,
Holly.
you're fine. You're fine. I think the other kind of things that we often hear bubbling up for like competitors, Rennie, is a lot of times people will bring up Ariba, they'll bring up Workday, and the reality of those solutions is they don't provide benchmarks. They're really designed to be more aligned to accounting and HR, and which is we're not. Clinical operations is a whole different animal. We've got requirements on us from the industry that are just non-existent in some of those other areas. And I'm not to say that accounting doesn't have its own share of problems. You've got plenty of standards you have to adhere to there, but they're not fit for purpose. And Ariba, they're wonderful solutions for what they do, but they aren't necessarily what CLIN needs. And you can go to them and go through the catalog and order your copy paper. That's great. But that's not what I want to necessarily see when I'm trying to select my payments vendor, my eTMF vendor. I need to see much more qualitative and quantitative data, and those solutions just aren't going to have it. And I think you really have to look at what's fit for purpose, because otherwise you're just jamming a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, and we integrate with these
solutions. We can
solutions.
integrate with those.
Yeah, I don't look at those as our competitors, but
they get brought up once in a while.
Yes, because it's about sourcing. So I actually wrote an article, which I hope you guys read, which is why I couldn't use Expedia to book a hair appointment. But it goes back to fit for purpose solutions. So you do need both Expedia and DoorDash or other booking solutions for your different booking needs. So anyway, any other questions? Fire up. I think we have another minute or.
Karen, any questions come in online?
No, not yet. I will encourage the group to do that. So, but I know we have a number that have previously come in, Rennie, so I'll let you pick from our list that we got going here.
So how about, let's talk complexity and multiple cohorts and, the age of, not just adaptive design, but, basket trials are becoming much more popular, especially in the biotech world and oncology for sure, and other TAs. How does Maestro handle those, especially from benchmarking?
We are also learning. So I don't want to claim perfection in anything because this is organic growth. And there's been, as much as COVID changed the world significantly in the last 2 years, there have been significant changes in or added complexity in the study design. We think the principles hold the same way. When you have more cohorts, you actually have to start and stop your trial more times, and you can do scenarios. Scenario 1, 2 cohorts. Scenario 2, 5 cohorts, and then you answer the question: what if it's parallel? What if sequential? What if I do this? What if I do that? So to me, it goes beyond a benchmark. It goes to a little bit study operational modeling, and being able to use tools that are going to get you to the what if scenario is very important. We also are looking at capturing data upfront from CRO proposals or from other service proposals in an anonymized fashion. But we know that studies adaptive is going to change 50 billion times, through the end. The good news is that through our lead module, we are actually starting to get data from completed contracts. And that is significantly more interesting. But because we are a young company, we don't have enough completed contracts in our database. That is to say that over time, getting more nuanced on complexity, it's going to be getting better and better, regardless of the tool, the modeling tool you use. It's a bit of an evolving exercise. But today you can do lots of what if scenarios with high level of accuracy. What you choose in the end, it may be different, but I think that guidance, it's very important, and you can achieve it today. precision of how many cohorts would be the ideal study scenario, well, we can look at using AI and other solutions that can actually be predictors of optimal design. So there was no question actually from our customers about AI, but maybe we'll do a whole different webinar just to talk about
That's a
how
whole
we are
different topic.
how we are thinking of using it, and the very interesting ways in which you can use the data to become not just give you the what if scenario, but to give you optimization based on conditions. So what if I only have $10 million and I can only, I only have 18 months, what is the most that I can do? And maybe there are some designs you cannot do.
So how about this?
Sorry, can I jump in real quick on the therapeutic area piece, because we didn't really tie off on that. And it's funny to me because this is such a progressive industry. Life sciences is always on the bleeding edge of technology and science and forward thought, but we are really backwards thinking in how we treat therapeutic areas. Because although therapeutic areas can be a cost driver, it's not for the reason most people expect. So for example, we always hear oncology trials are expensive. They are. But it's not simply because it's oncology, it's because it's a complex trial and there's a volume of procedural due diligence that has to go into it, because an MRI costs what an MRI costs. It doesn't matter what the therapeutic area is going to be. Your geography in that case has much more impact on cost than any therapeutic area. So where therapeutic areas really drive costs is going to come down to those strategic decisions. Does a particular patient population need added support? Geriatric populations, for example, we always pick on the geriatric populations around DCT, but that's the reality of it. Some of those populations may be less inclined to do like a DCT model. They may need added transportation costs. Obviously, if there's multiple languages, translation costs. Pediatrics is notorious for added procedures. So complexity in study design actually drive costs way more than therapeutic area. And this is an area that we've really staked a stake in the ground on, because we recognize that our thought process here is disruptive, but the industry needs to change. We have been going by the same playbook for 30 years now, and it's not gotten us any closer to solving those problems. And I really think that we have to look at therapeutic area in a much different way than what we've been doing when it comes to cost.
Yeah, we get the question all the time, do you have experience in rare diseases? And I know myself, I worked at BioMarin at a great time in the evolution of the company. And I will ask anyone, what's rare diseases? Because there aren't two the same. And I've seen one that were, okay, yes, always hard to recruit. But it's not, a rare disease is not a therapeutic area. It really isn't. No. Nor is it a particular indication, nor are they two alike, but they have common things. So it's the ability to model their uniqueness, their complexity, that is really relevant, because I don't think there is such data as rare disease data. It's know-how on how to execute on a disease that there's none comparable to it.
That's
the problem is they're used to being ignored by the rest of the industry. That's the problem.
Correct. But from a benchmarking perspective, it's how it's doing the what if scenarios that's going to drive the cost. It's not a sliver of data that this is the bucket of rare diseases. It really doesn't mean much.
I agree.
Okay, take a deep breath. We are at the top of the hour. This was meant to be a Q&A type session, because we've got 50 some questions actually. We didn't even answer 20, so we may do another one. But Karen is going to tell you right now, give us lots of feedback, ask more questions. So give us a reason to do another webinar and have fun with it.
Absolutely. Yes, you can feel free to email me directly or to info@strategicon.com or strategiconpharma.com. And look forward to seeing you guys on the next webinar. So thank you, Rennie, for moderating, and for Holly and Anka for giving your time to do this.
This was
and
great.
Everybody that attended, you'll be getting the link, and you can listen to these guys go on again if there's any parts that you missed or wanted to hear. So have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.